I used to think that if I worked hard enough, they'd finally see me, not just as the youngest in the room, not just as the only daughter, but as someone worthy of carrying the Whitmore name into a new era. My name is Sienna Whitmore. And if you've ever heard of Whitmore Legacy Builders, the luxury real estate firm that once dominated Charleston's skyline, you already know the weight of my last name. What you probably don't know is that the legacy in the title wasn't just branding. It was a decree, a silent contract written in stone. This empire is for the men. I spent most of my childhood on construction sites and in model homes, trailing behind my father Graham and my brothers Preston and Logan, like a forgotten shadow. While they held blueprints and brokered deals, I was handed clipboards and coffee. My ideas were met with polite nods, the kind you give a child for scribbling outside the lines. I was ambitious. A word they use the same way? You'd describe a puppy trying to climb the stairs. Cute, harmless. But I never complained. I swallowed every slight, every dismissal I took, every internship they tossed at me, worked every miserable late-night shift. They wouldn't. I read every contract, learned market behavior inside out, and could recite the company's financials better than the CFO. At 23, I was the only Whitmore with an MBA. At 24, I was managing entire regional projects. But in the Whitmore family, titles meant nothing if you were born into the wrong body. Maybe I should have seen it coming. After all, my mother, Margot Whitmore, had once been Margot Wells, the rising star of Charleston's interior design scene before she became a Whitmore. Before Graham forced her to pack up her dreams and put them in a closet, no one opened anymore. She had traded her voice for a gold-plated silence. And maybe deep down, she always knew that would be my inheritance too. Still, I fought foolishly desperately. The first time I brought up succession planning at a board meeting, a simple suggestion to start grooming the next generation, my father didn't even let me finish my sentence. "You're not one of us, Sienna," he said loud enough to slap the room into stunned silence. I blinked confused. "Excuse me." He didn't even bother looking at me, just kept flipping through his notes like I was background noise. "This business was built by men, run by men. You're talented, sure, but this isn't your lane. You don't have the instinct." Across the table, Preston chuckled, the sound thick with arrogance. Logan smirked. My mother stared at her, folded hands saying nothing. Not even Uncle Frank, who used to whisper encouragements behind closed doors, spoke up now. "You're emotional," my father added, like he was offering a diagnosis I should be grateful for. "You care too much about people, not enough about winning. That's not leadership, Sienna. That's sentiment." I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. That meeting was supposed to be a stepping stone. I had spent weeks preparing, building a 5-year expansion plan complete with projected growth marketing innovations and eco-smart design strategies. But all they saw was a little girl playing CEO. And maybe it was even more pathetic because I had believed that loyalty mattered, believed it when a senior marketing associate, someone I foolishly trusted with both my ideas and my heart, told me he admired my vision. I found out 2 days before the board meeting that he had been quietly feeding my strategic plans to Preston, laughing behind my back, selling out my future for a seat closer to power. In the Whitmore World Trust was a currency only fools invested in. Later that evening, I sat alone in the office I technically ran, but officially had no title for. The lights were dim. The windows reflected nothing but the blackness outside. I stared at my laptop screen, at my hollow reflection, when the door swung open without a knock. It was Graham. "You know," he said casually, like we were discussing the weather. "Your brothers aren't perfect, but they understand how to carry the Whitmore name." He studied me for a moment. You were always more of a dreamer." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "You mean someone with vision." He narrowed his eyes. "I mean someone who thinks having ideas is the same as having power." His voice dipped lower, cold enough to freeze the room. "Pathetic girl, you were never the smart one. You just worked harder to compensate." That line, I can still hear it even now. He turned and left without another word. The door swung closed with a soft click that sounded like a death sentence. But for the first time, I didn't feel like crying. I felt awake. If they wouldn't make room for me at their table, then fine. I would build a better table. A table so big, so undeniable, that one day they'd choke on every word they ever spat at me. They didn't know it then, but that was the last time they would ever speak to me like I was beneath them. They had written me off, but what they didn't realize was I had already started writing a story of my own. You'd think that after everything Graham Whitmore said to me, I'd just walk away quietly. Maybe I should have. Maybe it would have been easier to let them have their empire of glass and dust. But I was still clinging to a shred of something dangerous. Hope that if I proved myself one more time in a way so undeniable, it would leave them no choice. They'd finally see me. So I did what any so-called pathetic girl who was never the smart one would do. I worked harder. Harder than they could imagine. Harder than they'd ever dared. I spent weeks analyzing market trends, emerging demographics, digital behavior shifts. While they clung to crumbling traditions, I saw the future. Eco-luxury homes with integrated smart tech. No one on the East Coast was doing it right yet, and I knew exactly how we could own the space. I built an entire campaign around it. Logo mock-ups, 5-year projections, an airtight brand story. I even tapped into my MBA network, pulling in consultations from rising stars in green architecture and tech innovation. This wasn't some school project. This was the key to the next decade of Whitmore legacy builders, if only they had the vision to see it. I booked a small presentation room at our headquarters, sent out formal invitations to the executive team. I still remember the way my hands trembled as I set up the slides. I still remember the way not a single person in the room would meet my eyes. And I remember most of all the way Graham smiled at the end. Not a smile of pride, not even amusement. That tight-lipped smirk he reserved for people he considered irrelevant. When I finished, the room hung in heavy silence. I looked to Preston and Logan, both slouched in their chairs like they were waiting for dessert. Uncle Frank yawned without apology. Only my father spoke. "Are you done?" I nodded throat dry. He exhaled sharply, like I had wasted his precious oxygen, and turned to Preston. "You want to explain to your sister why that would bankrupt us in a year?" Preston chuckled, rubbing his jaw like he was too bored to even fake politeness. "Sienna, no offense," he said, voice dripping with condescension. "But this isn't grad school. You can't just throw buzzwords into a slideshow and call it strategy. Smart Homes Green Building. Who do you think we're selling to? Elon Musk." The room erupted into soft, stifled laughter. I gripped the edge of the table. "It's not a joke," I said, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear myself. "The numbers support the strategy. This is where the market is heading." "Numbers lie." Graham cut in, voice sharp. "Instinct doesn't. And my instinct tells me this whole pitch is nothing but a vanity project. You want to play CEO, fine, but not here." He pushed back from the table and stood signaling the meeting was over. "This is a real company, not your little sandbox. You want to build something, Sienna, build it somewhere else. Start your own firm, see how far that gets you." And then came the final blow. "Don't come back here pretending you're one of us, because you're not. You never were." That word again, not one of us. I looked around the room, desperate, foolishly, hoping for someone. Anyone to stand up. Uncle Frank wouldn't meet my gaze. Preston smirked like he was already composing his victory speech. Logan picked at his nails, utterly disinterested. Margot Whitmore wasn't even there. She rarely attended meetings anymore. Maybe she'd learned long ago that hope was a dangerous thing in this family. I gathered my materials slowly, feeling the weight of every snicker, every glance. As I reached the door, Logan leaned forward, voice low enough that only I could hear. "Hey, if it doesn't work out, I hear there's an interior design company hiring. You could help them pick out curtains." A fresh wave of laughter followed me into the hallway. And just like that, I knew this wasn't my family anymore. Not in any way that mattered. I wasn't their daughter. I wasn't their sister. I wasn't their colleague. I was an outsider wearing their name like a borrowed label I had never truly been allowed to own. And for the first time, I didn't want it anymore. I didn't cry when I left the office. Not when I stepped into the parking lot. Not even when I peeled off my name badge and dropped it into a trash can without looking back. But when I got home, the dam broke. It all came pouring out. The humiliation, the rage, the heartbreak. It came in violent, endless waves. Years of being talked over, dismissed, underestimated. Years of being told to be grateful for the scraps tossed my way like a dog, begging under the table. I wanted to scream, to set fire to everything they built and watch it burn. But I didn't. Instead, I packed a suitcase. No goodbyes, no dramatic declarations. The next morning, I left Charleston behind, left the sprawling Whitmore estate, the glossy towers of the city, the suffocating weight of a name that never truly belonged to me. I walked away from the boardrooms I was never truly invited into, from a family that only loved me when I stayed small, and into the unknown. I found myself in Savannah, a few hours down the coast, but a world away. A city where no one knew my last name, where I wasn't Sienna Whitmore, the black sheep of a crumbling empire. I was just Sienna, a woman with nothing left to lose and a vision too sharp to waste. I rented a tiny studio apartment above a bakery that smelled of cinnamon and fresh bread every morning. The windowsills were chipped. The heater coughed every time I showered, and the ceiling creaked in the rain. It was perfect. I opened my battered laptop on a secondhand table and stared at a blank screen. No logo, no company letterhead, no smirks, no laughter, no tight-lipped condescension. Just me and the beginning of something they would never see coming. There's something liberating about being underestimated. It gives you the precious gift of invisibility. And when you're invisible, no one sees you coming until it's far too late. I didn't have their money, I didn't have their connections. But I had something else. Clarity. No more trying to prove myself to people who had already decided what I was worth. No more begging for a seat at a table that was never built for me. I named the company Vesper Atelier, a nod to the evening star barely visible to the naked eye, quiet but unyieldingly powerful. The early days were brutal. I burned through my small savings faster than I could have imagined. Dinner was usually instant noodles. Sleep was a luxury. I pitched my services to anyone who would listen. Small contractors, boutique developers, even homeowners, designing custom spaces. Most said no, a few said yes. And I treated every single project like it was $1 million contract. I handled everything myself, drafting, sourcing, project management. I wore every hat because failure wasn't an option. It wasn't enough just to survive. I wanted to outperform them, and I was going to do it on my terms. Within a year, Vesper had 5 full-time employees, a small but sleek studio space, and a client list that whispered through the right circles. We stayed under the radar on purpose. My family had no idea I was even still in the industry. What they didn't realize, what they couldn't imagine, was that Vesper wasn't just another new firm, it was competition. I kept an eye on Whitmore legacy builders from a distance. It wasn't hard. They were still clinging to outdated models, still pandering to aging buyers, still pretending the world wasn't changing under their feet. They were coasting blind complacent. I was strategic. I hired a marketing expert who had left a major competitor. And together we crafted a brand that spoke directly to the clients. My father always dismissed young professionals, women-led households, tech-driven families who wanted homes that felt personal, flexible, sustainable. Our style was clean, efficient, forward-thinking. Everything Whitmore Legacy Builders was not. We started bidding quietly on mid-level commercial projects. Some of the same contracts my father's company used to win, without lifting a finger. But now they were losing to a no-name startup they couldn't even recognize in the dark. And I liked it that way. I began poaching some of their best people, the overlooked, the undervalued, the ones who had stories just like mine. One by one, they came to Vesper hungry, brilliant, ready to build something that belonged to them. Our little star was growing brighter, and they still hadn't looked up. But success draws attention, and not all of it is loyal. It was Callum Reeves, one of my earliest hires, who betrayed me, the man I trusted to oversee several of our growing projects, the one who smiled in every team meeting, who promised we were building something real. I found out he had been quietly leaking our design plans to Whitmore Legacy Builders, selling pieces of Vesper's heart to the very people who had once laughed me out of their boardroom. When I confronted him, he didn't even deny it, just shrugged and said, "It's not personal, Sienna, it's just business." That was the day I stopped believing in loyalty built on desperation. I fired him on the spot, tightened our contracts, strengthened our NDAs, learned to protect my empire, the way I had once begged to protect my place in theirs. Callum thought betrayal would break me, that I would fold under the weight of it. He was wrong. All he did was sharpen the blade, because the next time Whitmore legacy builders tried to compete with me, they wouldn't just lose business. They would lose everything. There was a moment about 18 months in when it all started to turn. I was sitting across from a high-profile client, one of those old money developers who usually handed their business to firms like Whitmore Legacy Builders, without thinking twice. They were down to 2 bids, my father's company and mine. I'd seen their proposal, safe, traditional, complacent. It read like a tired rerun of every project they'd coasted through for the last decade. Then they picked up my file, Vesper Ateliers. The man scanned through it slowly, his brow lifting higher with each page. "Who are you?" he finally asked, tapping the sleek modern cover. "This is fresh, it's smart, it's what I didn't even know I wanted until I saw it." I smiled, careful, steady. "Just someone with a lot to prove." We got the deal. By the end of that quarter, Vesper had outbid Whitmore Legacy Builders on 3 major contracts. Each victory pulled them a little further out of their fading comfort zone. Their name, once a golden ticket, was starting to lose its luster. Their charm, once so effortless, was curdling into something desperate. And I was just getting started. Still, I stayed quiet. I let them ignore me, let them laugh in their polished boardrooms, mocking the small unknown firm that kept beating them, let them think I was irrelevant, forgotten. Because by the time they realized who was dismantling their empire, it would already be too late. They say pride comes before the fall. But in my father's case, it was pride that built the fall brick by arrogant brick. From the outside, Whitmore Legacy Builders still looked immaculate. The glass headquarters gleamed under the Charleston sun. The glossy magazine ads showed beaming families in picture-perfect homes. But inside, the foundation was rotting. I saw it happening from a mile away. It started with a canceled contract, a sprawling luxury resort development in Maine that they had bet everything on. The client pulled out at the last minute, citing creative differences. But I knew better. We had pitched them a cleaner, smarter vision. We offered better execution and lower overhead. They never stood a chance. Then came the layoffs. First a few junior designers, then the longtime receptionist, the woman who used to sneak me extra candy at the front desk when I was a kid. Then a project lead, someone I had once worked alongside, who used to bleed Whitmore blue so proudly. When he reached out to me, desperate for a fresh start, I didn't gloat. I didn't remind him how he once chuckled when I was asked to fetch coffee instead of blueprints. I just sent him the contract. "Welcome to Vesper," I said simply. The real blow came 6 months later. Whitmore Legacy Builders lost a major government contract, a multi-year retrofit initiative for eco-friendly buildings. A deal they had barely fought for, too sure their legacy would carry them across the finish line. But times had changed. Buyers didn't want the same tired handshakes and dusty tradition anymore. They wanted innovation, sustainability, vision. Everything Vesper embodied. I watched as their press release stumbled through excuses, blaming market volatility, labor shortages, anything but their own blindness. They didn't name us, of course. They didn't dare. But I knew they could feel us breathing down their necks. The desperation was palpable. Their once polished social media pages started mimicking our branding. Awkward hashtags about green living, rushed announcements about new modern initiatives that felt hollow and forced. I almost laughed when I saw it. They were trying to outpace a ghost, and the ghost was winning. Rumors began swirling through the industry. Whispers about internal chaos, about mismanagement, about financial strain. I didn't start them. I didn't need to. Truth leaks when people get scared, and fear had finally seeped into the marble floors of the empire that once cast me out. My family was starting to panic. And the best part, they still didn't know who was holding the match. One afternoon, I walked into the New Orleans Design Expo. I wasn't there as a speaker or an exhibitor, just an observer, someone curious to see how Whitmore legacy builders would present themselves now that they weren't the uncontested kings of the room anymore. Their booth was tucked near the back, a sharp contrast to the prime spots they used to command. Without question, fewer people hovered around their display. The energy was different now, nervous hollow. My father wasn't there. But Preston and Logan were standing stiffly in navy suits, trying and failing to mask the unease that clung to them like humidity. I stayed far enough away that they wouldn't notice me, just close enough to watch. A man approached them. A developer I had met just weeks earlier during a pitch meeting for Vesper. I watched as Preston smiled, handing over a brochure with the old Whitmore flair. But the developer shook his head, casual and polite. "Sorry," he said. "I'm already in talks with Vesper Atelier. They're doing some incredible work." Preston froze for a fraction of a second, then forced a tight smile. "Vesper," he echoed. The man nodded enthusiastically. "You should check them out. They've got something special going on." And with that, he walked away. I saw it happen the moment Preston's expression dropped like a mask shattering on the marble floor. He turned sharply to Logan, voice low and panicked. "Who the hell is Vesper?" I smiled to myself as I melted back into the crowd. The reckoning had begun, but the real turning point came on a rainy Thursday morning. I was sitting in Vesper's new studio space, larger now, airy, with floor-to-ceiling windows, reviewing our next expansion plans. A soft knock sounded at the door. It was Callie, my assistant, her face unusually pale. "You need to see this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She handed me a tablet with an article already open. Headline: Whitmore Legacy Builders Faces. Major Lawsuit Over Delayed Projects and Contract Breach. It wasn't just a hit piece. It was an exposé, a brutal, unsparing spotlight on the chaos festering inside the company's polished exterior. The article outlined missed deadlines, budget overruns, poor leadership, toxic internal politics. Anonymous sources, likely some of the former Whitmore employees now thriving at Vesper, spilled everything. My father's empire was bleeding, and the industry had just caught the scent. I didn't celebrate, I didn't gloat. I just closed the tablet, leaned back in my chair, and let out a long, quiet breath. This was never about revenge. It was about truth. It was about proving not to them, but to myself, that I had never been the pathetic girl they tried to convince me I was. That I wasn't naive, wasn't emotional, wasn't playing dress-up in their world. I was building my own, and soon the world would know it too. There are moments that split your life into two pieces, before and after. For me, it happened on a quiet Monday morning over a chipped mug of black coffee and a buzzing phone. I almost didn't answer. I was deep in reviewing mock-ups for a luxury eco-development outside Seattle, when Callie burst in again, this time breathless, her hands shaking slightly. "Sienna," she gasped. "You're trending." I blinked, confused. "What?" She thrust her phone toward me, and there it was. Headline after headline. Sienna Whitmore, youngest female CEO in the U.S., revealed as founder of Vesper Atelier. Heiress of Whitmore legacy builders, quietly outmaneuvers her own dynasty. The ghost founder, how Sienna Whitmore built an empire while her family slept. It was everywhere. CNN, Forbes, Business Insider, even morning shows, clips from private tech conferences where I had spoken anonymously, photos of me in front of Vesper's sleek headquarters. Everything modern and glass and minimalistic, everything Whitmore legacy builders had failed to become. And the crowning jewel, a brutal side-by-side comparison chart showing their plummeting losses against our meteoric rise. The media didn't just report the story. They drew the battle lines for us. My phone exploded with calls, emails, texts, journalists, investors, old colleagues who had once turned their backs on me, now clamoring for a seat at my table. But the message that hit me hardest wasn't from any of them. It was a single text from my mother. "Your father saw the news. He hasn't spoken in an hour." I stared at the screen for a long time, not out of guilt, not even satisfaction. Just silence. For years, Graham Whitmore had insisted I was nothing more than a dreamer. For years, I had believed that if I could just prove myself, It would heal the hollow space he left inside me. But sitting there watching the world celebrate everything he had tried to erase, I realized something simple and profound. I didn't need his validation anymore. That same afternoon, my publicist confirmed the request. A televised interview, national coverage, prime time. "Do you want to do it?" she asked, her voice cautious. I hesitated. I hadn't built Vesper for the spotlight. I built it for freedom. But maybe it was time to take the mic. Not for them, for me. "Let's do it," I said. The interview aired 3 days later. I wore a deep navy suit, elegant, understated, no flashy logos, no armor, but my own skin. No revenge speeches, just presence. The host opened with my story, how Vesper had risen quietly to reshape the eco-luxury real estate market in under 4 years. How a young woman no one had believed in had built an empire the old titans never saw coming. And then she asked the question everyone was waiting for. "Is it true that you're the daughter of Graham Whitmore?" I smiled, calm, grounded. "Yes. Why hide it?" I didn't hide it. I said simply, "I just stopped apologizing for not being welcome." The host blinked, visibly moved. "And now you've built a company that outperformed theirs." I shrugged gently. "It's not about outperforming. It's about building something that reflects who I am and giving others a place to do the same." When the interview ended, the live audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation. That night, Vesper's website crashed under the weight of new traffic. We received over 300 partnership inquiries. Our stock jumped 12% in 24 hours. And somewhere back in Charleston, in a crumbling mansion that once stood for something indestructible, I knew my father sat in stunned silence. Because the girl he once called pathetic, the one he dismissed, belittled, and buried, she was no ghost anymore. She was the storm he never saw coming. While the world celebrated my name, while news anchors and industry titans marveled at how a ghost had risen to outbuild an empire, I knew there was one place where silence reigned. The Whitmore family group chat still active, still carrying the hollow echoes of a family built on appearances, but now eerily quiet. No snide comments, no dismissive emojis, just silence. Until one message finally appeared. It was from Preston. "You used us." I stared at it for a long moment. I didn't reply, not then. What could I possibly say? They had used my silence for years, used it to erase me, to pretend I didn't exist. Now the world knew better. The announcement hadn't changed me. It had only forced them to finally see what they had spent a lifetime ignoring. Sienna Whitmore, the one they said would never lead, never succeed, never be more than a dreamer. And now I was the youngest female CEO in the country, but deep down I knew my story wasn't quite finished. There was still one final step left, one last chapter to close. It came fittingly in the form of a crisp ivory envelope, thick, expensive, embossed with golden lettering. "Whitmore Family Annual Reunion, Saturday 4 p.m., hosted at the estate." No personal note, no apology, just tradition, like nothing had changed. I stared at it, letting the irony soak through me. 4 years ago, they had laughed me out of boardrooms, scoffed at my dreams, tossed me aside like an afterthought. Now they were inviting me back into the house that had taught me to stay small. But this time I wouldn't be walking in the way they expected. This time I wasn't coming for their approval. I was coming for closure. That Saturday, under a sharp, clear sky, I pulled up to the Whitmore estate gates in a sleek black Rolls-Royce, the Ghost model. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. The guard, who once barely glanced in my direction, snapped to attention, his eyes wide as he lifted the iron barrier without a word. The long driveway was lined with luxury cars, BMWs, Audis, even a vintage Bentley or two, but none gleamed quite like mine. I stepped out slowly, heels clicking against the stone path, wearing a tailored ivory suit. No flashy logos, no desperate need to impress. Just quiet, unshakable presence. As I approached the entrance, the murmurs began. Heads turned. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. They all saw me, finally, but none seemed to know what to say. I walked into the grand foyer like I belonged there because I did, whether they liked it or not. My mother Margot was the first to greet me. Her eyes softened, and for a fleeting second, I saw something that almost resembled regret. "You look incredible," she whispered. "Thank you," I said simply, then leaned in. "Let's not pretend anything." She gave a small, sad smile. "Fair enough." Inside, the party buzzed on. Cousins, uncles, old family friends, laughing a little too loudly, sipping champagne that tasted more like obligation than celebration. Near the fireplace, I spotted Preston and Logan, frozen mid-conversation when they saw me. Preston's jaw tightened. Logan's eyes flicked down to the car keys in my hand. I didn't stop to greet them, didn't offer a polite nod, didn't offer them the chance to rehearse their old lies. I moved past them, cutting through the room like a blade through silk, heading straight for the back patio. And there he stood, Graham Whitmore, the man who had built an empire out of stubbornness and entitlement, the man who once believed his bloodline was worth more than anyone else's ambition. He was alone, staring out over the manicured lawn like a king surveying the ruins of a kingdom he no longer controlled. He turned at the sound of my heels on the stone, and for the first time in my life, Graham Whitmore looked small. We stood in silence for a beat that stretched and stretched thick with everything unsaid. "You came," he said at last, voice quieter than I remembered. "I did." He studied me, eyes tracing the woman standing before him as if trying to piece together a puzzle too complex for his simple pride. "You've made quite a name for yourself," he said. I said nothing. There was nothing left to say that he would understand. He looked away, swallowing hard. "Sienna," his voice strained, "I may have been wrong." I almost laughed, "may have been." But I didn't come for apologies. I came for something more important. Closure. He shifted awkwardly. "The company's struggling," he admitted. "Your brothers, we could use your help." I met his gaze, steady, calm, unwavering. "You said I was never the smart one," I said softly. "Just a pathetic girl with ideas and no power." He didn't deny it. I gestured vaguely toward the party behind us. The crumbling estate, the dying legacy. "Now you want my help." His lips parted as if to argue, but I cut him off. "I'm not here to rescue you, Dad." My voice was gentle, not angry. "I built something without you. While you mocked me, I was building. While you dismissed me, I was becoming everything you said I couldn't be." He stared at me like he didn't recognize the daughter he had so easily discarded. "Good." I turned to leave. But before I did, I looked over my shoulder one last time. "You were right about one thing," I said, my voice soft but unbreakable. "I'm not like you, and thank God for that." I walked back through the house and the people parted like water around me. Whispers trailed after me like smoke. Some curious, some bitter. None brave enough to reach for me. But it didn't matter. I wasn't there for their admiration. I wasn't there for their forgiveness. I had already won. Outside, the black rolls gleamed under the afternoon sun, waiting patiently for its driver. I slid into the seat, started the engine, and looked back once. Not at the house, not at the people still clinging to a fading legacy, but at the girl I used to be. The one who had once begged for a seat at a table that was never meant for her. And I smiled. Because she wasn't begging anymore. She was leading. From that day forward, the world would never forget her name. Sienna Whitmore. Not the black sheep, not the afterthought, not the pathetic girl. Just the woman who rewrote the rules and made sure no one like her would ever be forgotten again. At the end of it all, Sienna Whitmore didn't need anyone's permission to lead. She didn't need validation from those who once tried to erase her. She chose herself. She built her own table, her own future, her own story. And maybe that's the most powerful thing any of us can do. To stop asking for a place where we were never truly welcome, and instead create a world where we finally belong. If you've ever been overlooked, dismissed, or told you were too much to fit into someone else's version of success, if you've ever had to rebuild yourself from the ruins of their expectations, you are not alone. I'd love to hear your story. What was the moment you decided to stop asking for permission and start living for yourself? Share it in the comments below. I'll be reading every single one. And if you're still on that journey, comment 6 to claim your space, your story, and your power. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, because here, your voice matters. Your story matters. You matter. Together, we'll keep building a world where no one like Sienna or like you is ever forgotten again.